Good morning, everyone. Are you all ready for another session in our UFMG Summer School on Brazilian Studies? Um, we are approaching the end of our course. That breaks my heart because it's been so nice. And then today's Thursday already. But on the other hand, we are delightful to have Professor Lucas together with us this morning. And he's such an insightful professor. He's such an insightful scholar. And he will be giving us some highlights on Brazilian law, which is such a tough matter. And he makes it sound um, less harsh as it seems, right? Yes, let's hope for that, right, Professor? So we're honored to have you. Thank you for having us with us, and thank you for being such a great help. Professor Lucas is our coordinator also, and we're really honored to have him with us and being part of our team. And thank you, for everything you've done for us this year, tough year. And I'll pass the floor to you so you can, help us out with some of these tough issues on Brazilian law. And hopefully by the end, we'll be enlightened by your words. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Luciana, for your very kind introduction. Thank you, people, a team from the International Relations Office for all the support in the minutes before the class. We had some problems with the sharing, screen, etc., but now we solved it all. Let me say to you, welcome to our most perhaps boring topic in the summer school. I am just trying to see if I can find my chat here. Just a minute, it disappeared right now that we trained before, but now it's not. Here it is. Chat. Wow. I can see what you are writing, and I will try to react directly to you live through the chat. But today we are going to have a different kind of class. Let me start by thanking Professor Davison and Professor Aziz Saliba for inviting me to participate to this edition and inviting me to be one of the coordinators of academic coordinators of the summer school. Unfortunately, because we are not holding this session on Belo Horizonte, my work now is only to control if you are tweeting everything and every day on Twitter and give you some grades. I think that this is quite strange, but in any case, I hope that you are coming to Belo Horizonte in the future and we will have the chance to exchange more about Brazilian law. Well, let me start saying you are seeing here the Faculty of Law of UFMG. The Faculty of Law is this strange building in the city center, outside the campus that is near Pampulha, that you visit or is going to visit this afternoon. And that is so not because lawyers do not want to integrate, but also because lawyers can be quite unbearable and boring sometimes. So they prefer to stay in the downtown and the city center. I will be taking questions myself, and I'm looking direct to the chat. I am not from Belo Horizonte. I think it is interesting to you to know a little bit about your professors. I am from the south of Brazil. I'm from an island called Florianópolis, and it's a horrible island to live because on the weekends we have to decide which each of the 42 beaches that we have to visit. We have a different accent over there. Perhaps the accent, Portuguese accent, more close to Portugal, Brazil, and it's full of colonial details from old Portuguese colonization. It's nice to understand this small difference of accents, cultures, and the Santa Catarina is a region in the south of Brazil, especially colonized by Europeans, by Germans, Italians, Polish, Russians. It's a quite interesting place to understand and to visit. Let me explain today the rules of the game of the next 2 hours. Participation is welcome. I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear your reasoning. I want to hear, I want to exchange with you, because the idea here is law is a dynamic subject. So I will not be teaching you for 2 hours. That would be just boring. Law is already a boring subject, and if we don't open it to discussion, it's become even more boring. Let me say that language reinforces bridges and not towers. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you are not a mother tongue, you don't have to speak a perfectly English. The idea here is don't be shy to participate. Languages serve to create bridges among people. Language serves to communication and serves to share ideas. So don't be shy. Write your question. Open your camera, and I will give you the floor, and you can speak a little bit, and we can hear each other and try to react. This is more or less the idea. The third point of the rules of the game is respect opinions, respect cultural diversity. Law is not about being right. Law is about reasoning. It's about making your opinion. And this goes with the idea that there is no monopoly of good ideas. Good to know, Denise, that you spent your Christmas in Florianopolis. There is no monopoly of good ideas. No one is right only because he's in a position of power or in a position of especially position place, because law is about arguing, is about sharing, is about testing your own ideas. And in all of that, of course, when you speak about law, you speak about politics, and you speak about sensitive issues. I will try not to enter in political, legal issues. I will try to be neutral, although neutrality, does not exist. I am biased. Everyone is biased. Everyone has its own conception before coming to a subject. So I will try to be as neutral as possible. And I will try to avoid political and these sensitive questions that are going on now in Brazil. However, you are also free to ask. What we are going to see in the next 2 hours, very rapidly, we are going to discuss a little bit about the function of law in Brazil and in a certain country. I will discuss with you 2 topics in our history, especially how law works in colonial period and the dictatorial period. I think that would be curious about to discover how the law react to the idea of being a colony, and how the law react to a dictatorship during the 60s and the 70s and part of the 80s. Then I will enter in our current legal order. What are the main principles about the constitution that Brazil promulgated in 1988? And what are the main ideas that we decided there to embrace for our country? I will try to discuss a little bit, very quickly, the role of constitutional court and its importance right now in Brazil. I will try to enter in my specialty, that is Brazilian law and foreign relations, international relations. What do we have about this in our legal system? And I will end up with 4 advices for the future. I would like to share with you some knowledge and some wisdom that I gather from my experience. I will give you 4 advices at the end of these classes. After that, if we have time, I will take other questions not related to the topics that I covered, but during the presentation, I think that you will be very welcome to participate, to give your opinion. Again, the rules are this: if you want to speak, open your camera, I will give you the floor, then you can ask, interact, or use the chat directly. In a certain moment, you all will be required to interact at the same time by the chat. So let's see how this works, and let's start a little bit about the functions of law. Just to explain it to you, this image in the background is our Supreme Court in Brazil, Brasilia. What is the purpose of law in a certain country? What is hidden behind a certain idea of law? If you see some days ago, in the 8th of July, in North Korea, there is a law that says that it's forbidden to smile. It's forbidden, people cannot have fun, people cannot have jokes, consume alcohol, or do interesting things, because on the 8th of July was the day in which Kim Jong-un passed away. What is hidden behind this law? Why all the people who had their anniversaries on the 8th of July cannot celebrate? Smile. Do you think that is the function of law, to try to prohibit smile? And what happened to those that smiled in those days? On the other hand, if we go to Italy, we're going to discover that there is a law in Milan, in the city of Milan, that makes smiling in public spaces mandatory. That's true. There is an old law from the empire, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that established that if you are in a public space, you should smile all the time. Why? Smiling is so important to become a law. What is the value hidden in these two laws? But strange laws you can find everywhere. For instance, did you know that it's legal? Did you know that it's illegal to die in the House of Parliament in Britain? And did you know that you cannot wear an armor within the Parliament, even if in this picture here you can see a guy clearly violating this law on purpose? And if you look this old lady, did you know that there is a law in the UK that says that you cannot beat or shake your carpets before 9 a.m.? What we are trying to protect in those instances? What is that we are trying to preserve with these laws? Laws also have a different function. For instance, they guarantee political rights all around the world. Did you know that Brazil is one of the countries that people can vote early in their ages? For instance, it's allowed to vote with 16 years. That is, in a certain moment, we decided that participation does not have to pay total attention to age. Young people need to participate in order to promote change. This choice had important impacts in elections. Every law, every choice of a certain state has an impact. What about the legal status of abortion worldwide? Look at these countries and see how abortion is a quite sensitive issue, because abortion protects a value, the right to life. The idea of abortion says how a certain society perceives the right to life, balanced with the right to a woman, and balanced with the right of the father. You have to balance these very sensitive situations. And that's the reason why Brazil has only 3 situations where abortion is allowed. 2 of them was to protect the health of the woman, and the second one is in the case of rape. But there is another one that was developed through the Constitutional Court, which is the idea when the fetus is anencephalic, when the brain is not completely formed or is quite damaged. This is also a situation where abortion is allowed. But look at this is important. This reveals a choice of our country. And now there are political forces trying to change this law and this specific rule in our legal system. But let's move to another interesting topic. What about laws that say when you can drink and what age you can drink? In Brazil, the law says that you can consume at 16, but you cannot buy only with 18 years old. Look at other countries that there is no laws about it, there is no regulation, and the other countries where drinking alcohol is completely illegal. These choices reveal a certain value of a certain country. What is the function of law in a certain country? Can be a political impact. Can we have an economical impact? Can it decide what about our products, to whom we have commerce, what products can enter our domestic system? And what about the protection of minorities? Should law protect minorities? Should law impose the will of the majority, as a president of a certain country recently said? Law has anything to do with morals? Morality is connected to law, or it has any social impact? What about the values that law tries to convey? This is a picture, a painting from Jean-Baptiste Debré, from the marriage of Peter I with Donna Amelia. Peter I was our first emperor. I think that you know that at this moment. He was the one who declared our independence. This marriage is important because it's also a legal binding situation. When you have a marriage, you have the legal decision on who is going to succeed, which royal family is going to succeed the throne, who has the right to rule. This is a very important consequence of the law. And that's the reason why we had, when we were in an empire, specific laws on succession, laws that you can find everywhere in the world where you have a monarchy. Because law is about stability and expectations. Look at this other picture painting here that I like very much. It's Combate de Botocudos in Mogi das Cruzes. Botocudos was the name that Portuguese used to describe all the tribes in Brazil in a certain moment without paying attention to their differences. And you know that we have differences in indigenous tribes. In Minas Gerais, for instance, we have 17 different tribes around the state, only to give you the idea of the complexity. But Portuguese people call it all Botocudos. And if you look at the laws at our time, at the time of colonization, you will discover that the law allowed the killing of Botocudos. Law was about fighting. When you decide who is the enemy, you allow to kill, which is forbidden in every legal system in the world, with exceptions. Law serves also to guarantee security. Look at this other picture that you have probably seen around in the week from other professors. I'm sure that you have seen it. What it shows to you from the legal point of view, what laws has to do with this picture. Funcionário brasileiro a passeio com sua família. This is a public servant. He is Brazilian state, but he is in front of the picture because he is the one that controls the society that comes behind him, not only his family, but also his property, which were the slaves, because law allowed slavery, and we will discuss that. But again, this is also an impact of law within your houses. The man at the time had powers over his own house because law also regulates, my slide's not functioning, but also regulates social and family values. Negociante de tabaco em sua loja, the tobacco salesman in his store. Here you can see how law operates in the economic field. This is a painting, again, from Jean-Baptiste Debré, but it's also a painting about freedom of commerce, who is free to sell his products, and the state, the law is there in the public official that you can see here at the corner, but also it's about the people who were not allowed to have liberties, but they have some specific liberties in order to foster commerce. Because at the end of the day, law is about guaranteeing and limiting freedom. Aplicação do castigo do açoite, Jean-Baptiste Debré. You have here the idea that when someone does not behave, there are consequences. One of these consequences are, in a certain moment of our history, physical consequences. And here it's operated not by the state, but from another slave. See how the cruelty of the legal system. That is so because law is about punishment. Independência ou morte. Independence or death, you know the story. You know the idea of Brazil becoming independent from Portugal. Here, what there is law to do with this picture? And my answer to you is, law is this own picture, because when you declare yourself independent, you take the liberty to enact law, to decide what happens in your country. And that's the reason why this is an important legal moment in our history, because law is also about recognition. These are two paintings that I like very much from Cândido Portinari. Cândido Portinari was very important for Belo Horizonte. He had many paintings in Belo Horizonte, and he was very good in depicting the cruelties of Brazilian world. Here you have the death of a child, and then os retirantes, the returns or the migrants, those families that had to move because poverty, because Hungary made them move. And law is about also, in a certain moment of our country, we had to tackle these problems with social policies, with social laws trying to help this. And there is a third painting in this collection that is Enterro na Rede, the burial at this hamaca, this net. That's not the word. I don't know what is the word. But the idea is that there is nothing more sad than when the death comes and you have to use your own bed, that was this net over there, to have a burial, because you have no other thing, you don't have any options. That is what you have. Where is the law here? Law may cause, but also may relieve suffering. Abolição da escravatura, this abolishment of slavery in Brazil. You know about that. I know that you've seen it. This happened when the Isabel Princess signed this specific law in the end of the 19th century. And from this moment, slavery was not permitted anymore, even if you already know this did not solve the problem. What does this picture show? Well, law sometimes is also about justice and can do correctness in a certain society. Bandeirantes a caminho de Minas Gerais. You can see here this painting of people exploring the interior and gathering mine, to gathering gold and exploring the territory. That this was important for us to establish our territory regarding Spanish colonizer from the other side of the continent. And this was important because law determines authority over the territory. This is another painting from Portinari that, this is not the name, that was a mistake. This is called Civilização Mineira, Mineiro civilization. Hammocks, thank you, Isadora, that's very useful. Civilização Mineira from Portinari. And this painting shows us something very important for us, people that live in Minas Gerais. You have the old city of Ouro Preto in one side of the corner, you have the bureaucracy in the middle, and then you have the new city of Belo Horizonte. You have this, you can see this in Belo Horizonte, it's in our main square, it's a beautiful painting. Every time that I can, I go there and see it because it's beautiful, it's enormous, and it tells a story about the changing of Ouro Preto to Belo Horizonte. We have a new capital, and this occurred through laws. Remember, for instance, that we had already a changing of capital. We had Rio de Janeiro, and passing through Belo Horizonte, you can see Professor Aziz and Professor Davidson in Belo Horizonte, we went to Brasilia. We had a new capital in the 50s. We changed completely our legal accent. And that is because law allocates political power. Here you can see President Figueiredo, one of the generals that presided Brazil during the military dictatorship. And he is having a horse hide with his friend, President Ronald Reagan of the US. Brazilian dictatorship was quite close to the US foreign policy, and they had together different political and legal consequences. They cooperated in a number of things, and they cooperated through law. And here we are talking about the 80s, because law reflects political arrangements. But the same Figueiredo appears in this photo, where he tries to give his hand to a little girl, and the little girl refuses to give her hand. And this picture shows that law may be used for contestation. Now we have the democracy. This is our first elected president. In a certain moment of time, Brazilians were allowed to vote again, to have the direct right to vote and to choose their political representatives. This was important, very important for a country that stopped in time for 20 years and had very limited rights, very limited political rights and other atrocities that we are going to discuss. And this picture represents this idea of law crystallizes new political values. But again, the same color was impeached. And you can see the move from the society saying, we do not want you anymore. Now we have the occasion to choose. We do not want you, and we will use the instruments that we have to put you out of the government, because law is an avenue for transformation. And here we have the most sensitive slide of my presentation. The last four presidents of Brazil, they all are intertwined in the same narrative. We had, in a certain moment, Lula da Silva from the left-wing party, and his successor, Dilma Rousseff. Dilma Rousseff was impeached, our second impeachment. And the second impeachment gave rise to Michel Temer, this old guy over here. He's our oldest president. And Michel Temer is a different political group. He's from a different political group of the other ones. And after Temer, you had another political group, here represented by Jair Bolsonaro. I can ask you this, what would be the impact of these four persons on the field of law? And there is an important impact, because these three or four different groups, they had political, legal, social perceptions, and this influenced different policies. But again, there is another important impact about this picture, because sometimes law doesn't help. And it is also, law is also determining who is going to determine the law. These four presidents, they indicated, they appointed judges to compose the Brazilian Supreme Court. The Brazilian Supreme Court has 11 judges, and these 11 judges, they are nominated by our current presidents. Here they are, the 11 men and women responsible, more men than women, please note, responsible for deciding when abortion can occur, what's the meaning of life, what's the meaning, who is going to decide in a certain issue, governor or president, who has the final word about quarantine laws, who has the final word about chloroquine laws. These men and women have an important power, and they were appointed by presidents. Look how politics and law come together, and look how some of them were able to appoint the people. You have Fernando Collor, our first impeached president, that appointed his cousin, Marco Aurelio Melo. You have Fernando Henrique Cardoso appointing another, not conservative, I can say conservative judge. Then you have Dilma and Lula, and you have Michel Temer. And of course, these men and women together, they decide an important issues for our country. And here you can see how all the narrative goes together. So let me conclude this part saying this. Now our Supreme Court is under attack. You can see that people is now trying to create a narrative saying that the STF is a shame. The STF is against Brazil, and Brazil does not want the Supreme Court. But do you think that this is logic? There is a point. They have a point. They say, well, they were appointed from political people. They represent some values, and you have to attack them. But this shows to you how even our legal field, that's supposed to be neutral, is not so neutral. And this is the set of our class, because you can understand what is happening in Brazil also on the field of law. An author once summarized this part saying this: the law of a country expresses a country's essential values and recognize institutions aimed to guarantee social order and promote essential values in a certain historical moment. It strikes a delicate balance between political and economic social forces. Therefore, the law is not static. It is under constant pressure from within and from outside the border of a country. And this is why law is now being taught to us, because you have to, in order to understand a certain country, you have to understand the values that it conveys through its laws and through its system, how it's organized, and why this is important. Anyone knows, if you want to answer by the chat, anyone knows who wrote this phrase? No reaction, no reaction. No. Well, that was me 2 minutes ago. In any case, I will now enter in the second topic of our class. It's Brazilian law and colonial dictatorial periods. Let's discuss these two topics very quickly, because I think that the time is running and I want to hear you a little bit. Well, colonial law. Here you can see in this picture a ceremony called the beija-mão, the kissing hand. Every time that the people need something to ask to the king, they would go to the king, kiss his hand, and ask for a grace, ask for some favor. This exemplifies how colonial law works. Brazil's legal system was strictly connected to the Portuguese legal system. And until a certain moment, we used to apply Portuguese laws in Brazil, which creates some problems, especially because we have different, completely civilization going on here. In a certain moment in the 19th century, we started to have law faculties in Olinda and São Paulo, and these law faculties helped to create a new elite in Brazil, and this new elite was responsible for then governing the country, and that's the reason why the great achievements of Brazil occurred through the 19th century, because only there you had an elite formed in Brazil. Brazil is therefore part of the continental tradition and not a common law tradition. What is this different? Why is that matter? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit with a flu. I hope it's only a flu, but I hope this is not disturbing you in any way. What does that mean? The difference here is more or less, if you remember, all this series of, I don't know, CSI, all this lawyer series. The US, the UK, and the Commonwealth legal system is essentially based in the words of the judge. Cases are important to create new law. Brazilian system was associated with the continental, Germany, Italy, France tradition, Portuguese tradition, which is, we believe in the law, in big codes, and lawyers and judges only interpreting the meaning of this, the laws. And that is important because it decides who has more power. Legislators have more saying. Legislators are more important in this equilibrium of power. How did the Brazilian system work in the times of dictatorship? Well, you already know that we had repression, that we had the restriction of rights. We had two constitutions imposed during the Brazilian dictatorship, and you have very little political participation. Alexa, that's a good question, Alexa. I agree with you. I think law should be taught early. I think that sometimes we understand not so important issues, and I think that if you understand our rights and political participation, law is not a monopoly of lawyers. And I think that it's a strategy that only certain groups of people can access to legal information. So I agree with your view, Alexia, that law should be taught earlier. And you should know what are your rights and how can you participate in the political process, because law is not an exclusive thing from lawyers. And I think that there is also a question of vocabulary. You are trained to hidden yourself in the legal vocabulary in order to make it complicated and only accessible for some in the legal in the society. But let's come back to the dictatorship. During the dictatorship, we had restrictions of rights, we have torture, we have disappearance of people. And let me just tell you a story that is well known to every Brazilian, that even became a song from a very famous singer in Brazil. That is Vladimir Herzog. Vladimir Herzog was a journalist. He was from Yugoslavia. He moved to Brazil and he lived a life in Brazil. He was against the regime. He was member of the Communist Party at the time. In 1975, he was arrested, tortured, and killed. And then the police said that he had committed suicide. And it was a so fake suicide that they took a photo where it was impossible to, I did not put the photo here, but you can find it easily on Google, put Vladimir Herzog, and you will see it. You will see that there was a fake suicide, and that created commotion. But only in 2017, his death was formally recognized by the government. Before that, we had only denial, and no one investigated What happened to him? No one investigated. And people knew who was his torturer because it appeared during the dictatorship in a famous magazine who was the chief of the police. So people knew and nothing happened. And that's the reason why Brazil was condemned in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in 2017. Look, this is a long time, very long time, to have reparation for one of the crimes committed during the dictatorship. And this, of course, raises us the question. The question here is, who is wanting to deny that those crimes happened? Who wants to deny that these things should not occur? Or who wants to say that good things occur during that time? Or do not all, I'm not saying that it's all criticizable, but the fact that we had some things that are not assumed, it's still problematic nowadays, only in 2017. That is too long for a family to have a reparation. The deny, and here you have an interesting news. Brazilian Bolsonaro government tries to defend the historical negation. The denial of crimes against humanity occurred in that period, and the celebration of dictatorship is protected by the freedom of expression, which is a right. How to strike a balance between these principles? Let me talk to you about these principles and the idea of having principles and the idea of what are our most important principles. And I will ask you for your participation in a moment. In 1988, we had our constitution, the constitution that is now in power. We had 8 constitutions since we are a country, and the first was in the empire when immediately after we declared independence. There we have the Montesquieu formula, the legislative, judiciary, and executive, and the fourth power. We have the moderator power of the emperor, and here you can see how Brazilian legal system adapted from the European one. And this constitution here was a great achievement. People really like it because it's important for a number of reasons. And Jessica Amorim, I will deal with your question. Professor, do you believe that the amnesty laws cover the horror of the dictatorship period? You see, I do not have a personal opinion about amnesty laws right now, because from one side, yes, your idea is true, Jessica. They serve to cover, but amnesty laws also serve to strike a balance in political powers in a given moment. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that is our regional court of human rights, says that they are illegal and Brazil should is null. These laws are null and void. That's an important stance in our legal process. But Brazil resisted, saying, the Brazilian Supreme Court said, this is so important to us, let's try to avoid this. So it's an open issue. I do not have my personal opinion about it. I understand the horrors were covered. And again, it's not so, for me at least, too easy to have a final opinion on it because I haven't read. What I know is that there are important initiatives like the Comissão da Verdade in order to understand what happened in those times. Our Constitution, 1988, here in the picture you can see the Supreme Court ministers. You can see the moment where the Constitution was promulgated, and the fact that you have also indigenous groups participating in the lobbying, the shaping, in the difficult drafting of the Constitution. And here she is, our Constitution. Every law student has a book of this, although I think that every citizen should have it, especially in a very more clear way, because even our Constitution can be very complicated to understand. So what are the values of the Brazilian legal system? What we decided to be our most important values after the dictatorship? And remember, every legal system, every legal order is a response to the historical process that preceded it. So this constitution reflects a constitution that was made after the dictatorship, after the limiting of political rights, after the limiting of human dignity. I will answer you a moment, Shizla. Let me go on in this moment, and I will go back to the questions. But thank you for your question. What are our values? Let's look a little bit. Sorry for that. Please cut this on the edition. Let's look a little bit on the text. Look at this text here, the preamble of our Constitution, where we put some of the values that we believe. We, the representatives of the Brazilian people. Do you know where this phrase comes from? We, the representatives of the Brazilian people. Anyone would like to put a suggestion from where we brought this inspiration? USA, very good. Well, we have a very good audience here, Stephanie, Maria, and Ana Luisa. This is, of course, it is the US Constitution. Although I'm an international lawyer, I prefer to say that it was from the UN Charter. We, the people of the United Nations. But the UN Charter was inspired in the US Constitution. And here, this is an important point, because we say our legal order does not come from God. Our legal order does not come from the monarch. Our legal order does not come from other things. The people is the foundational argument from our legal order. Convened in the National Constituent Assembly to institute a democratic state, first important value, or better said, the second value, democratic state, for the purpose of the state, look at this, the purpose of the state, ensuring the exercise of social groups and individual rights, liberty, security, well-being, development, equality, and justice. Remember the pictures that I show you. All the values are now here. The law. This is an important document. As supreme values of a fraternal, pluralist, and unprejudiced society, founded on social harmony and committed in the internal and international orders to the peaceful settlement of disputes, promulgate under the protection of God. This Constitution of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I could stay an hour here with you discussing every term here and discussing what is the meaning of every term. But let me call your attention, and who wants to speak now, please. Open your camera. Why do you think that we put God in our Constitution? Why we put the protection of God? 1988. Who wants to speak a little bit? No one. Tell. Yes, please tell.
Hello. For me, as you said, a political moment and every moment in history is a result from everything that came before. And if we try to understand Brazilian culture and Brazilian politics, it is much based on the Western culture in general. And of course, at that time, more than now, the majority of the people in Brazil were Catholic. And anyway, Christians in general are the majority of Brazilian people nowadays. And so the use of under the protection of God there is, for me, basically this a response to this ethical construction of the Brazilian culture.
Thank you very much, Tel.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Tel. Tel raised two good arguments. First, there is a question of response to the precedent moment, and two, the majority of Brazilian people were Christians at the time. So this is a insertion in order to protect the majority. Can we raise an argument against this idea? Anyone here would like to participate? And please open your camera and say a little bit. Open your camera. And I will give you the floor. I would like to hear a counter-argument, what we could use to try to avoid. What is the problem with the argument that Theo raised? Be courageous, participate. I would like to see you. Theo, do not answer your own argument. Let alone to other one. Please, anyone. What is the problem with this insertion here? Everyone here is comfortable with the idea of God appearing in the... I hear microphone open.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go for it, and I'm just guessing, but you know, they talked so much about individual rights, individual liberty, people can be different or whatever, but then they put in God, and people have really different ideas of God and what God would expect, so it makes it a bit more difficult to validate the initial argument, I reckon.
That's very good, Shizla. That's very good. How do I pronounce her name?
Shizla. Yeah.
Shizla. Okay, perfect. That's a very good argument that Shizla brought to us. There is a problem of balancing this idea with the minorities. When you put here religion, and Paul is raising another argument on the chat, religious pluralism. Look, that we are not saying the Catholic God. There was a good lobby at the time saying with the protection of the Catholic Church. There was a good lobby at the time, but they prefer God because they said, okay, God serves to everyone. With the expression God, we try to accommodate a good number of groups, and we try to accommodate a good number of ideas. We have the Muslim, we have indigenous, we have everything. But again, this was a question of the majority, because even our preamble, as good as it tried to be fraternal, pluralist, etc., they tried, again, Brazilian constitution was not neutral because law is not neutral. The state is secular, says Stephanie. Yes, and Rihanna says it's a problem for those who are Christian as well as those who have a different idea of God. Yes, this is a problem for the minorities that in 1988, all the lobbies that were writing our constitution, they managed to. But on the other hand, should we avoid it? Should we completely cut and avoid the important value of the majority? Should we just exclude it with the idea that I do not have the right answer here? I'm just trying to make you to raise your question. Do you know about your own countries? Do you know what is the value if you have God there, if you not have God there? Do you have this information about your own country? Let's see what else we have in the text of the Brazilian Constitution. Let me see how we are about the time. Okay, we are okay. Fundamental principles. Look at this, fundamental principles. It's the time to build a new order. It's the time to choose the new ideas that will shape our government. Look what is the first principle that we decided to put in our Federative Republic of Brazil: sovereignty. A principle not so new in international law and international relations. A state should be sovereign, which says that we will not be, to any extent, subdue or under the oppression of other power. Citizenship, and citizenship here means essentially political participation. We are not like the old order. We believe in political participation, political openness. And then we have a very important value, that is the dignity of the human person. People should not put to tortured. People shall not be put to torture. People shall not be put under any kind of restrictions without the legal process. We believe in the whole idea of the dignity of the human person. And again, another important value, the social values of labor and free enterprise, which is at the same time the protection of the labor rights, but also the protection of the liberal state that says, I believe in the idea of free enterprise and political pluralism. And one can say, well, political pluralism is important, but you have to know that during the dictatorship, we have only two political parties working together, and those two were to some extent allied to the dictatorship. One, it was more left-wing, and at a certain moment was more resistant and more pro-democracy, but they are both political parties, the only option that we had. I think that Professor Bruno yesterday told you about that. So look at this. We have important values in our constitution, in our new order. Again, democratic, look what we have only in these two essential excerpts that I brought into you. We have important ideas. We have democratic origins. We have popular legitimacy. It comes from the idea of the people. And this was important during the Collor impeachment. People had the impression that it had a say in the political debate. It's a very long constitution. We have 250 provisions, 250 articles dealing with environment, dealing with human rights, dealing with the competences, organizing the Brazilian state, saying who is competent to legislate about mining or who is competent to legislate about individual rights, family law. It's a complex system that was different from the US Constitution that is very short, or the UK Constitution that is unwritten and works quite differently from us. This was a very detailed constitution because Brazilian representatives understood that it was important to detail everywhere in order to construct a system of checks and balances, in order to limit power, limit the executive, in order not to grow too strong, in order to avoid the judiciary to take much power. It was a delicate balance. And it admits amendments, which is also important. Why this is an important information? We have more than 100 of amendments, because that says, I can explain it to you, but let me come back to the question that I was addressed before. That was Schussler's question. Well, you have transparency, Schussler. You have Brazil is quite transparent about public debates. We have something like the UK. We have only a television channel if you want to follow the political debates, the commissions, etc. And you have also transparency in the judiciary. All the debates are public, which of course does not say much because people do not usually follow these channels so much. But in the recent times, I think that the debates within the Supreme Court are more followed by the media in general. So transparency is an important value. However, it's not much about, this does not improve that much political debate, unfortunately. Okay, amendments. We can amend everything in our constitution. The constitution puts limits to what you can change. So it's not an infinite power, it's not an absolute power. And look what are the values that we decided to keep in order to avoid changing. I know that we have two questions. I will balance questions and the main slides. One, the constitution may be amended on the proposal of, that's procedure. Paragraph 4, no proposal of amended shall be amended which is aimed at abolishing, one, the federative form of states. This is important because it's the balance between local authorities. Governors are important in Brazil, perhaps not as important as in the US political system, but governors are important. So you cannot change this idea of federation. We cannot create an Galaxy empire, but we have to follow this idea of federation. The direct, secret, universal, and periodic vote. So elections shall be held during our normal activities, and these are important because it's open to everyone. Brazil in the past had the censitary vote, only who had a certain amount of money would vote. Then the separation of the government of powers. This is another important issue for us. We cannot have only one power. We have this delicate balance between the three powers. Legislative, which is quite strong in Brazil. There are those who say that Brazil lives in a hidden parliamentarism, which is not so true because we copied a little bit the US regarding presidentialism. And we have these individual rights and guarantees. You cannot diminish the rights that we've conquered during the Brazilian constitution, during the Brazilian constitutional process, which is, again, a problem regarding minorities. Let me see the questions. Professor, can you explain why do we have so many constitutional amendments? Yes, we have so many constitutional amendments because when we decided to write the constitution, we put everything as constitutional value. And there is a problem in the hierarchy here. We'll show you in the hierarchy of laws that you are seeing now. You only can change the superior law if you change that kind of law. So you need to operate a changing from up to down. So you have to change the constitution in order to change some important values that we put in that 250 articles. That is one main issue because we have so many constitutional amendments, because our system is, we put very much things in the constitution. What about the amendment that restrains the investments in health and education and no limits to election costs? These amendments, as you can see, they were not envisaged in Article 60, so they are allowed. We allow this kind of situation. You can, of course, argue, Denise, that this would represent a diminishing of the individual rights and guarantees. But a lawyer would argue with you saying, no, you are not diminishing, you are just precising it. Do you believe in that argument? You, of course, can contest that. Is it easier to make another constitution? Well, there are two answers to you, Stephanie. One, the important values and the important balances we are not changing. The important agreements that we achieved in 1988, we are not changing. We are changing other issues that we have put there. Even within the Constitution, there is a nucleus of rights that are unchangeable and are more important. Well, the president alone cannot amend, Shisla. The president can propose an amendment and then it will be voted and we have a special votation quorum in order to have a specific changing in the Constitution. Changing the Constitution is not so easy as it seems. You have to construct political, it's not a majority vote, it's 3/5. Sorry, I don't know how to. It's more than majority. Is this the exact quorum? If I'm not wrong, let me move on. The Constitution divides Brazil in one union, one main unity, and 27 federative unities. And here you can see the idea. I know that you have a beautiful lecture with Professor Thiago with beautiful slides, But here you can have the idea how big Brazil is on other countries within it. Minas Gerais is bigger than Spain. My region is like Hungary. Santa Catarina in the south is as big as Hungary. And like Hungary, it's quite conservative. I think that 80% of them voted for Bolsonaro in the last election. So this is one of the things that the Constitution wants to control, the organization and the division of power in Brazil. I already explained you a little bit how this works in Brazilian legal system. And the Brazilian Constitution, it's very innovative because it established more than 70 individual rights that cannot be changed. Well, and here I think that Denise's question is important because it establishes a right. It says people have the right to health, but it's not a detailed right. And even the laws that come after the Constitution have to be interpreted. And that's the reason why the judiciary is so important, because it gives meaning to those texts that the legislative put and enacted. Another important thing about our Constitution is the fact that it establishes social and labor rights. That's quite innovative. It's not so common to see this in constitutions. There are rights to indigenous peoples. They are protected, at least in our Constitution. And it is also quite innovative because it establishes the protection of the environment as one of the functions of the political power. And there is a right to, everyone has the right to an ecologically balanced environment. And this, of course, we can contest some of these ideas, but we are going to discuss that. I am seeing the questions. I will be happy to answer them. What kind of human rights are guaranteed? Just to give you some examples in order you to understand why this constitution was important. First, the end of censorship. If you see some of the most beautiful Brazilian songs, they were songs that passed through the censorship. It guarantees the freedom of expression, but the freedom of expression right now in Brazil is being used as a shield to sustain every kind of opinion, even fake news, as you have seen with Patricia Campos Melo. There are rights to children and teenagers. There are direct elections in 2 ballots. We choose directly our representatives in the executive and the legislative. The judiciary is chosen by public competition. There are right to votes to illiterates, which is still a huge part of Brazilian population. Racism is a crime without bail. The torture is prohibited, and there is equality of genders. What a beautiful country Brazil is, right? And this, of course, raises a question between the distance between letter, spirit, and reality. You know, Montesquieu, the guy who idealized this idea of balance of powers, one of the guys who idealized. The idea was there before. Montesquieu says, okay, if I look to the countries, to the text of a law, I cannot see the real country, because every country can have beautiful law. You have to see it, how it is implemented. And here we have one of our issues, that is the fact that the environment and indigenous people are losing rights in the current government, which is quite complicated. And I will discuss with you why so. Apart from the Constitution, what else do we have as laws? Again, we are a civil law, a continental country. We believe in big laws with everything inside, trying to organize the society. We have a criminal code. We have a civil code for every question of private issues and family issues. We have tax code because tax is an important function of the state, and the tax laws in Brazil tend to be quite controlling, and it has been criticized from, for instance, the OCDE, that should be less restrictive. We have an important labor laws that were changed and diminished in the current government. We have a code for the consumers. This is quite innovative, and other countries do not have it in this idea. Every time that you buy something, people should be protected from the big powers, from the big companies. So we have a very advanced Código de Defesa do Consumidor, a consumer law. But let me, before entering the questions, ask for your participation. Well, let me try to address some of the questions. Is there a way population can have a say in the amendments, or it's only possible through voting representatives? Well, the formal process is representative and representatives, but the Senate has some mechanisms in order to gather public opinion. And again, there are very good, important ways to press your representatives that we usually do not know and we do not use. Alexa question: what are the barriers between our inclusive constitution and our unequal reality? That's a very good question, Alexa. And I think that even if I do not have a definite answer, I will try to deal with them later. Bolsonaro and the constitution obviously don't get along. Well, that's a good opinion. I cannot possibly comment on that. But that's an interesting opinion. Okay, now those of you that are sleeping because our law is a little bit boring, I want you full participation now. Write on the chat if you believe that a certain law is true or false. And those who have more, I don't know, those who have more right answers, they will have a special grade at the end of the course. Of course, I am lying. There is no such a thing. But let's try to see who gets more good questions. Topless is allowed in Brazil. This is true or false? Answer the chat. Several truths. A huge amount of truths. False. Gary. And then a huge amount of false. You are looking like myself in the voting of the department. True for men, false for women. That's an interesting, nuanced answer. Well, let me give the point to Carrie, who I know is a she. Carrie is right. Topless is not allowed in Brazil. And here you can see Vinicius de Moraes, our very famous composer, and with the girl from Ipanema, you know the song. And here, Vinicius de Moraes is very famous of this idea of tropical Brazil, and of course, we sell the idea that topless is allowed. We have some specific beaches that we can go completely naked, but topless is not allowed in Ipanema, so when you go to Brazil, please do not do that. True or false? You cannot smoke in public spaces. True. False. True. False. Let's see where the majority goes. If it's closed, no. You see, there is also always someone thinking like a lawyer, trying to complicate. It depends. So it depends is the typical lawyer answer. It depends on the climate change. You see, you cannot smoke in public spaces, but you can smoke on the street. You cannot smoke on bars, restaurants, but you can smoke on the street. This is interesting because compared to other countries, Brazil is not so smoking country. It's not so popular smoking in Brazil, especially in the young generations, like in other places in the world, which is quite interesting. Gambling is not allowed in Brazil, true or false? This is the picture of Jogo do Bicho, the animals game, where you choose an animal and then you say, well, I put R$ 5 in the pig this morning. I will put R$ 5 in the cow this morning. And then there is a ballot and an animal comes out. That occurred in the beginning of the century because of a zoo. It occurs in the Rio de Janeiro, near a zoo, and that these were the animals that they would say in order to, because gambling is not allowed in Brazil, even if sometimes it occurs. And Jogo do Bicho is still working right now. I have someone in my family that work for it. Well, we can, of course, edit in the future. True or false? Hunting is allowed in Brazil. Hunting is allowed. False, says Denise. False, false, false. I don't think so. True. Sometimes it is. Well, I'm having fun, you can see it. Anyone else would have a guess? True. Well, the answer is, it is true. It's, sorry, it's false. Hunting is not allowed in Brazil at all. You cannot hunt animals in the forests. That's the reason why we don't have safaris or things like that. For this person in the photo, it is allowed. Well, in Brazil, it's possible to have a contract of dating or a relationship. True or false? False, false, true, true, false. We have a divided public here. True, false. Well, let me say, it's possible to have this kind of contract of dating and relationship. Bizarrely enough, you can have this informal or better, your relationship controlled by a contract. True or false? It is allowed to use helmets inside premises. False, false, false. We are going to, this is tricky, false. This is tricky because you are seeing Luna Lovegood over there. Well, the majority is going to the false, apparently. Well, it's not allowed, bizarrely enough. You cannot use helmets inside premises. I don't know why so, but this is a law. You see, laws are not always very reasonable. True or false? This is an important law. In Divinópolis, Minas Gerais, it is forbidden to carry chickens upside down. True or false? I love Divinópolis. Lot of laws. Have no idea. True. Brazil is out. True, true. This is so specific that must be true. True. Well, you are right. It's true. You cannot carry chickens upside down in Divinópolis. That's a very important law that apparently protects chickens. The next law, in Pouso Alegre, Minas Gerais, there is a fine to those who use banners with grammatical errors. This is true or false? Happy chickens in Divinópolis. False. True. I hope it's true. we have a divided public here. Well, let me tell you this. In this picture, you see roupas de inferno. The correct way would be roupas de inverno infantil, children winter clothes. But there is an error, and this is hell clothes for children. So this is quite problematic, which is, of course, true. There is such a law. There is a fine for those. This is, of course, not happen in Pouso Alegre. In 1999, the city of Juiz de Fora, Minas Gerais, proposed a bill in order to make horses use diapers. Is it true or false? Cute, true, no way, true. Yes, let me tell you, Shizla, that this happened. There was a proposed bill, and I don't know if it's good or not. It did not pass, but they tried to put it. Juiz de Fora is the famous city where President Bolsonaro got stabbed. So my point here is that strange laws occur in every place in the world. As citizens, we should pay attention to good laws. These laws are fine. This law is interesting. You can have fun with them, but you also have to pay attention on what's happening in your parliament, also from this other point of view. Okay, let me go on and how to solve these conflicts in Brazilian law. And this is quite important. How do we try to apply this law to reality in Brazil? That's one of the questions that someone raised. Again, we have this idea of three powers in Brazil, and that is the importance of the Constitutional Court. Because the Constitutional Court, there's a grammatic error over there, you can see. I would be fine if I were in Pouso Alegre. Our judiciary is organized in a way that the Constitution shall be applied by every judge in the whole pyramid. We have a special military justice. We have a group of judges only for labor disputes, a group of judges only for military justice, and we have the normal justice. And you can appeal if you do not agree with the outcome of a certain dispute. For instance, let's suppose that Theo and I have a fight because I carry my chickens upside down in Divinopolis. Then Theo is just furious about the fact that I was violating the law. And then Theo brings me to the judiciary of Divinopolis. The judge of Divinopolis says, okay, Mr. Lima, you violated the law. Here is your fine, and you will be arrested. I said, come on, should I be arrested for carrying my chicken upside down? And then I appeal. I appeal to the judge from Minas Gerais region. And the judge from Minas Gerais region says, Mr. Lima has the right of carrying chickens upside down because this is an economic issue and he has the freedom of economic. So it's important for him. And then Theo says, come on, we should protect animals. We should protect the environment. We have rights in our constitution saying that you have to respect the laws and protect the environment. Again, we go up again for the Brazilian. That depends, of course, on every case. We have two possibilities, but let's suppose that it goes to the constitution. And here is the important thing about our constitutional court. Is the constitutional court. It is these 11 men and women that will define the meaning of the freedom of commerce, the meaning of the freedom of the protection of the environment, and they will define to what extent the Divinopolis law goes against the Constitution or not. And that's the importance of this course, because it can say the last word about the meaning of the law, the last word about the meaning of an important value. And that's the reason why it is now under attack. That is why people on the streets are trying to attack them because they are still protecting the values of 1988 Constitution, some values that people do not agree with, and they do not try to argue. They try to attack the system. That is, in my opinion, not so democratic practice, because you do not try to reason within the system. You go and attack the messenger. And by doing so, you're not attacking one idea, you are attacking the whole system. And that is reason why our constitutional court right now is under attack. And I cannot agree sometimes with the position that they assume. Sometimes, for instance, in my specific field, I do not agree the way they interpret the obligation. But as a law professor, I will try to argue. I will try to suggest what avenue should be taken in the future. But I do not say we should arrest them, as some ministers have suggested in recent times. And that's the reason why right now our democracy, our whole system, and all the achievements that we made during the after the dictatorship are under threat because people are not trying to reasoning anymore. They are attacking the system and attacking the message, which is, in my opinion, a little bit undemocratic as a practice. So before I enter the last topic and my final advices to you, let me try to gather some questions here that you made. Let me see, what do we have? I think that the first question here is from Shisla. Very good questions and good participation. Shisla, 10 points for your house. What do you think is responsible for the massive bureaucracy in the Brazilian system? How do you think this could be improved? Massive bureaucracy is a problem of perhaps every country, but Brazil in other countries can be more chaotic in this regard. One of the explanations for this comes from the fact that we, to some extent, copied the Portuguese system, which is quite bureaucratic. But from one side, bureaucracy is a guarantee that all the rights should be protected. You put a specific procedure that should be followed in order to give to all the same specific rights. The other idea is you are limiting rights since you create many barriers for this. To be simple in your answer, and again, I am not someone that studied very profoundly bureaucracy, let me say just this. You have to, in order to diminish bureaucracy, you have to diminish the state. In order to diminish the state, you have to cut some places. And in order to cut some places, you have to make people unhappy. So it takes courage to do this kind of measures. And usually, this kind of measures do not come for the good of the state. Sometimes it is also an idea of liberal project to diminish the role of the state. And I think that during the coronavirus crisis, we can see how important is the state for some areas and for some issues. So the main problem here is the old debate between liberalism, privatization, and a strong state guaranteeing rights and good values. I do not know exactly where I should be in this class. I have my own opinions, but I don't think that I have. My idea here is to explain to you what are the tensions between the choices. The bureaucracy is one consequence of a bigger problem. Let me see what else do we have here. I think that, I don't know if I answered you, Shisla, I hope I had. Is there any transparency to the civilians about the laws, amendments of the Constitution suggested by the legislatives, or is there any public testing before publishing agreeing on those laws amendments? There is no testing, there is just discussions, what would be the implications, but of course, there is the period between the implementation of the law, which is called vacatio legis. There is this period of before adaptation, but Brazil, from the point of view of transparency, is hardly criticizable. Everything is online, everything is almost everything is accessible. We have the transparency portal where you can see the salaries of every public functionary. You can see how much do I earn if you enter this system. So I think it's not a question of publicity. It's a question of awareness of what informations are allowed to you, what kind of informations you may have access to, and what kind of debates. I think that we have a big gap between the representatives and the population. We don't have this intermediary group in order to translate and to make things more accessible that perhaps other countries have. We don't have lobbying, for instance, official lobbying like the US. We have other kinds of lobby, of course, but we don't have, there is a huge gap. And it's a gap that perhaps we could tackle by teaching law early to our citizens. That was a very good question, Kirana. Thank you for it. Polly, when you look at the president, we have the feeling that he is against the Constitution. He has a prejudiced speech. He's against the human rights. He's in favor of torture. So why he is still in power? I mean, from the law point of view. Well, the law point of view, as I told you in that concept before, that's a very good question, Paul. The law is the political balance that in a certain moment we achieved. He's in power because some of his ideas were defended by the majority of the population. The law is about also settling the mechanisms for deciding who is he in power. And he is in power, and now that his group is in power, he's trying to change some of the values that he believes, his group believes, that should be changed. Well, let me try to answer you with a metaphor. I think that we are heading to the end, so I can use it. Do you remember Harry Potter 6, when Lord Voldemort came and the Minister of Magic come to the Prime Minister and says, Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Britain, Prime Minister, I'm sorry to let you know, there is now a threat. There is a terrorist wizard putting a threat to all of us. And then the Prime Minister said, okay, come on, do something, you have magic. And then Rufus Scrimgeour answer, you know, the other side also has magic. Law is not a control, there is no monopoly of the law. Law is an instrument to be used by different actors. And that's the reason why law can be used to convey new ideas. I think that one of the points of law is also to be a point of resistance and to say these values are important and we should protect it. And I think that this is what Brazilian society is doing now. I think that this is what important and courageous journalists like Patricia Campos Melo, they are doing now. And that is why we are trying to do now at UFMG, trying to show you that there are some important values that should not be forgotten because they were important in history. And that's perhaps the reason why history is trying to be modified. Because if we change our perception of history, we can easily change our perception of the current values. I hope that I answered your question, Bonnie. Denise, by the other side, the Supreme Court puts in evidence inequalities like domiciliary prison sentence for ones and refuses habeas corpus to young men who stole 2 shampoos. That is also true, but that is also an effect of the system and especially an effect of our constitutional court. Since every judge has a say about the law, they can have different says. So you can have different decisions in different situations. Usually the Supreme Courts serve to create uniformity in the law, but sometimes the system fails. And this is the idea. We should refine our legal system. Denise, events like this do not aim to justify the argument that STF corruption. I think that events like this do not justify the idea of corruption. I think that events like this just show how the law has problems and we have to debate it, but we do not have to point the finger and say we not need you and we should change you. That's perhaps my perception. Perhaps I'm not being so neutral right now. Okay, let me finish my last topic and give you my 4 pieces of advice. Brazil and international law and international relations. In a certain moment, Brazil was, that's tomorrow's class, so I will more or less introduce tomorrow's class, showing to you the legal perception of the story. If you have any questions, I think now is the time for the last questions. Brazil and international relations. We put our main principles in our constitution. Professor Davidson Belém Lopes is one of the experts in all of these principles. I only know it from the point of international law. But we decided that law should also guide our foreign policy. And we decide to protect our national independence. We decide to protect the prevalence of human rights. We are part of many treaties, human rights treaties. And that's what I say to you about the exterior pressure. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, they condemn Brazil sometimes for their violations. So we have pressure from outside also to change and adapt our laws. Perhaps you don't know that, but we had a very good advancement in domestic violence laws because of the pressure from outside, from the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. That is the Maria da Penha law, which is a law that protects women from domestic violence. And this law was essentially made from pressure from the Inter-American human rights system. So Brazil is also under pressure to change some of its positions. And now it's the moment where you can see the most sophisticated, aggressive, and also not so sophisticated intellectual battle, because you have these ideas clashing in the public debate. Prevalence of human rights then is also that we believe in the human rights that are shared in the Western values. Self-determination of peoples, which is very important. Brazil, for instance, supported the Chagosian people in their independence from the UK in a recent diplomatic question of civilization before the International Court of Justice. The idea of non-intervention is quite important for us in Latin America, because we do not want to enter in the business of other countries, and we do not want Argentinians or Paraguayans or Uruguayans saying things about our domestic problems. However, we could perhaps say that non-intervention sometimes is forgotten by our foreign policy. Equality among states is also very important Latin American principle. The defense of peace. Remember that Brazil last war, it was in the 19th century, the Paraguayan War, and we have a lot of issues over there about a potential Brazilian genocide. Brazil went a little bit further than it should, some historians say, and we have also this strange thing in our past, but now we defend the peace, the peaceful settlement of conflicts. We do not enter in war so easily. We help people through the multilateral system like the United Nations, and the Haiti is a good example in this regard. We have cooperation among peoples for the progress of the mankind, and we also have the idea of political asylum. We understand that sometimes people are under threat in their own countries, and we should protect them, even if the implementation of all these principles depend on the government. Just to give you an example, the idea of political asylum was contested quite recently when there was an Italian citizen, Cesare Battisti, in Brazil. He was accused of terrorism in Italy, and Brazil granted him asylum. When Bolsonaro came to power, this guy understood that he was under a threat, and then he fled to Bolivia, and there he was arrested, and he was sent to Italy. Again, it's a sensitive issue. I do not know who is right or who is wrong. I'm just giving you the idea of political asylum is something important for Brazilian country. You will discover tomorrow that we have a long-standing diplomatic tradition. We are a country very open to different cultures because we were made by different cultures. There are a strict control over treaties. Treaties enter the federal system as law, so we have this strange system that I will not bore you at this moment of the moment. But let me just say two important things. Brazil is part of two important organizations. The first one is Mercosur, but Mercosur is not yet, or perhaps will never be, something like the European Union. Mercosur is a group of states trying to advance common economic policies that sometimes have some political common ideas, but we are not yet an integration system like European Union. And the Organization of American States is not exactly the United Nations. It is perceived as quite biased, and that's the reason why sometimes there are also clashes with the Organization of American States. And this has also impacts on our law. But Brazil is, happily enough, part of the American Convention of Human Rights. And there is a system for monitoring human rights in Brazil. And I think that this system will be very important in the near future because of what is happening right now in Brazil. Before I go to my 4 advice, I will leave this question for the future. Let me see if we have any question. We have a lot of things, but we don't have questions. So let me finish with my 4 advices to you in the future. Again, remember, there is no monopoly of good ideas. Law is a good idea. Lawyers do not have the monopoly of the law. And you should understand not only the Brazilian law, but the law of your country. I try to prove all the morning that laws convey important values. Every law is an idea, is a value, and you should understand correctly what is at stake with that law. So pay attention to laws. And again, you don't need to be a lawyer to do that. 2, try to understand these laws and view the rules of Brazil, of your country, and discover yourselves in the process. What are your opinions about a certain law? What are your opinions about abortion? Do you agree, do not agree? Think about it, because if you think about it, you can argue about it. And if you can argue about it, you do not try to attack the ones that are deciding. You try to reason and you try to advance political speech. Political speech and political debate is way better than fake news. My 3rd advice to you is improve your language skills. Learn another language. You don't know the opportunities that you will have tomorrow. You don't know if you will have an opportunity in an enterprise that has business with Brazil, so your Portuguese is good. You don't know tomorrow. So improve your abilities. And this is not so costly, especially during your quarantine. My last advice to you is, of course, enjoy in the future, but soon, Belo Horizonte. It will be a pleasure to meet you all here. Again, I thank you, the organization, and I enjoyed very much my moment with you this morning, the interaction, and I will read very happily your tweets. Thank you very much.
That was so great, Professor Lucas. Thank you ever so much for your presentation. We enjoyed it, and we have so many compliments. And the best one I read was that was one of the students that said that if they heard you before, they would take law school.
Thank you for
That's
that.
a very nice compliment, right?
well, it is, but even if you hadn't taken law, you should pay attention to your law, and you can.
I know, yes. That was excellent. Okay, so guys, if you kind to join us later at 2, we will have a UFMG tour. Can you believe that, Professor? We're going inside UFMG.
Wow.
We have a walking tour, by the way.
Very nice.
To UFMG and some of the surroundings, and we'll know a little bit more about Belo Horizonte as well. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun later on. So I will wait for you at 2. And Again, it was such an honor to have you, Professor, and it's been so nice having you in the organization of this great summer school on Brazilian studies uh, uh, offered by UFMG. And so you have some time to grab a mug of coffee, a bite to eat, and we'll be back in a bit for the Portuguese classes, right?
Tchau, tchau, pessoal.
Thank you, guys. See you.
Luciana,
See.
the cameras.
Yeah, I forgot. Guys, let's see everybody's faces. Hello. Great to see you. Hi, hi. Hope you enjoyed. I told you. Was that Professor Lucas has such a delightful way of presenting us. Such an arid topic, right? Great, guys. So nice to see all the faces, right? It's been great. João, I saw you see João. João, now you have a background. You're so fancy.
Yeah, I finally moved it.
I'm gonna get one of those too. So I can be anywhere I want, right? Okay. All right, guys, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, have fun.